Alex Klein is an advisor to one of the founding team of Efficio.
I spent 22 years on the road that they're on, and given how successfully Efficio grew, I went further on that road than most. Jens, who is one of my co-founders and was Efficio's CEO, called me up and said, why don't we create our own firm from scratch? We all quit our relatively high-paying jobs and got together in London and started to negotiate the venture capital. I remember we went to the Ford headquarters in Cologne, and I remember we went to the executive bathroom, and it was all very quiet. There was nobody in there. We just gave each other that look of, okay, this is it.
Make it or break it.
It's make or break. We grew to a place beyond our wildest dreams. I got to a point where my net worth was minus 100,000.
Wow.
No house, no car, no savings. I remember my wife calling me in the middle of the day, very excited because she'd found a £5 note behind the sofa.
Oh, wow.
And now she could go to the local shop and buy orange juice for the kids. That's a true story. Nothing in life comes for free. You pay a price for everything you do. Luck is a funny thing, right? It falls from the sky, but you have to put yourself in its path. You have to recognize it. You have to grab it.
Hi, I'm Marco Marambe, Managing Director of Procurato. In this podcast series, we're spending time with procurement and supply chain leaders, and we talk about their career and how they got to the top of the chain. Join me as we go through their journeys and their tips and advice on how to get to where they've got to. Hi, today we're here with Alex Klein. Alex Klein is an advisor to mid-sized consultancy services, and he helps them with their growth and helps the companies do better and ensure that they achieve their targets. You will probably notice that as well. Alex works with us, and the most interesting aspect of the conversation we're going to get into, of course, is Alex's background and where he's come from, which in effect was one of the founding team of Efficio. So for those of you in our industry, you know exactly who that is. Alex, good to have you here in the studio.
Great to be here.
Good. So Alex, it'd be great to hear from your own words in relation to what it is that you are doing right now in your role as advisor, both to us and all the other firms that you work with, what you actually enjoy doing about that role. And then we'll go in our normal format back to the past and start from the very beginning and go down this. I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting story for a lot of people watching this around how Efficio came around to be. So if you want to give us a little bit of a view of what you enjoy, and then I'll ask you some other questions.
Yeah, so for the last, 3 years, I left Efficio 4 years ago, took a year off, and then basically got dragged back into work. So for the last 3 years, I've been advising small and mid-sized consultancies along their growth journey, really. And, given what I did with Efficio, I have, a very good experience and a good credential for doing that, because I spent 22 years on the road that they're on. And given how successfully Efficio grew, I went further on that road than most. Mm-hmm. And it's when I finished Efficio, when I was looking to, start my sort of post-retirement portfolio career, I thought about the different things I could do. The default would have been to be a procurement consultant contractor. But I, after 22 years of leaving all the work to large teams, I didn't want to
get back in it,
get back and get my hands too dirty. So that was off the table. And I think being a non-exec director for a FTSE 250 company, I just don't have the background or the CV or frankly the appetite for that. And I thought, what are my skills? And I realized that my skill was being a consultant and growing a consultancy. And so it was, an obvious natural progression.
Yeah. And I think with all the skills that you've learned, I mean, this is not a small firm that we're talking about. This is a very successful, the most successful one within our industry
Yeah.
of consultancy within the procurement sector. So, you can't just ignore that and go off and do a role like that. So I completely get it. And what are you proud of the work that you've been able to achieve in the last 3 years or so with some of the clients without?
Well, I mean, I do see it as I guess giving back and passing the baton and teaching the next generation a little bit, if you like, and that's very satisfying. So I work with founders of consulting firms. They're smart, motivated people. They're also very open. It's very different to consulting to a large corporate, which is what I did for most of my career. So they're small, nimble companies with highly motivated, intelligent leaders who are keen to learn.
Yeah.
And who are always asking, what lies on the road ahead? What can we expect in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years?
Yes.
And what do we do now to prepare for that? And
So being asked to be an oracle, really.
pretty much. And no, but it's a lot of fun. It's very satisfying to just be able to help them, and it's relatively easy because I've been there and got the T-shirt.
Good.
Yeah.
So that's where you are now, and now let's go back in time to the start of this very interesting journey that you've had.
Yeah.
But before we do that, just to get to know you a little bit better, give us a little bit of background about yourself.
Yeah.
And then also answer this question for me. If your family and friends were to describe you, what would they say about you? So maybe start with a bit of your background and then move on to that.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the background, going right back to the beginning, I'm German by birth, but spent only about 8 years of my childhood in Germany, lived in Spain for a while, and then moved to the UK when I was 12 with my parents, and then grew up mostly in the UK from there. Went to university in the UK, went to business school in England. And then in terms of my career, while I was doing my MBA, there was several routes available. It's different now, but back in those days, it was really investment banking, consulting, or industry.
Yeah.
Now you have, you can work for big tech, you can start your own company.
Yeah.
But back then there was kind of the three buckets, and I was immediately drawn to consulting because I could see that it had a lot of variety. You got early responsibility. It was kind of glamorous. It was international. It was better paid. So I decided to go down the consulting route.
Great. So before we get on to this piece, so what would your friends and family say about you?
Friends and family. Well, my wife, calls me all manner of colorful names, but that's probably not.
Usually seems a theme in these conversations we have.
Not appropriate for the podcast. No, I think on a serious note, I guess what I'd like people to say, and I think what they would say, is that I'm authentic. What you see is what you get. I'm very honest. I say what I mean. And there's a downside to that. That authenticity, coupled with my German DNA, can often come across as blunt and non-diplomatic. So that's the flip side of it. But I think it's important to be authentic in this world. And
I'm sure your friends also have other nice nicknames for yourself, but maybe we don't share those either.
Yeah, probably not good to share those. And the other thing I would say is I've changed a lot over the last,
of course,
10 years or so. I used to be kind of the archetypal, cocky, arrogant consultant for many years because of the journey that I went on with Efficio. It was very intense. I was very focused on that. I was really all in. Since I've left, I've become a lot more relaxed.
That does help with, I imagine, the high pressure, and we'll get into that now. So, take us through that journey. So you said, connecting back to what you said, you decided you're going to go into consulting, and you joined one of the most known, I suppose, consultants. Tell us a little bit of story before, the magic happened of where you got together with some other contacts and decided to set up Efficio.
Sure. No, out of business school, I joined A.T. Kearney.
Yeah.
And A.T. Kearney is very operationally focused, and they were, and I guess still are, amongst the big firms, the leader in supply chain and procurement consulting. So I learned that trade there. I learned to be a consultant, but I also gathered a lot of procurement expertise. And then I spent 7 years there, 4 years in their London office, and then I moved to their New York office for 3 years. Wow. Served some fantastic clients, Rolls-Royce Aerospace Group, and in the US, Bethlehem Steel, Hewlett-Packard. Fantastic experience. In 2000, the dot-com boom happened, and that was partly about B2C dot-coms like Amazon and eBay, but the other part was about business-to-business e-commerce, and that essentially is e-procurement. And Kearney was full of young, bright consultants who knew a lot about procurement, because Kearney had a focus on that. So we all became very attractive to various e-procurement startups and consortia and buying platforms that were springing up.
They were picking people off the team, I suppose.
They were picking people off from Kearney to the point where it started to become a problem. Because any consultant with 3-4 years experience wanted to jump at the opportunity of being, an entrepreneur. I was in New York back at that point. Most of my Kearney friends were back in London, my original sort of crew of friends from Kearney. We all had job offers from these big, heavily funded, heavily VC-funded e-commerce startups, and that's what everybody was doing. And at one point, Jens, who was one of my co-founders and was Efficio's CEO, called me up and said, hey, I've been thinking, rather than join one of these big, heavily funded startups and be a small cog in a big wheel, why don't we create our own firm from scratch?
There you go.
And my initial
the life-changing call, basically.
Life-changing call, except that he was in London, I was in New York. I'd just been promoted to principal at Kearney, so I was making good money. I was very comfortable, and my wife had just had her first baby, and he was a few months old. Mm-hmm. And so my initial reaction was to say, well, that's not going to work. That's unrealistic.
Big risk at this point.
Very risky. It would involve moving back to Europe with a brand new baby. And I wasn't sure, but I said I'd think about it. And then he called me back within a couple of weeks and said, well, actually, I've now secured I think it was a $4 million venture capital funding. On that basis, I essentially quit my job at Kearney, and so did the others. There was 6 of us. 5 of us were Kearney, 1 was with Gemini. We all quit our relatively high-paying jobs and got together in London and started to negotiate the venture capital, the shareholder agreement associated with that. Mm-hmm. The problem was that right in the middle of those negotiations, the bottom fell out of the whole .com thing.
Yeah.
And as you would expect, we suddenly got a call from the would-be investors who said, sorry, we're pulling out. And so then there we were, 6 of us.
Having left all your jobs.
Having left our jobs.
Yeah.
We had no jobs, we had no salaries, we had no funding, we had no clients. And it's not like we were, senior partners with client relationships in our pocket. I was 31, we were mid-level engagement managers.
Yeah, but you didn't also start from like zero experience. So I'm sure a lot of people see that lots of companies have come up in more recent years in a new version of R.com where they start with no experience whatsoever. You had some level of base, and
Yeah.
it was 6 of you, but
Absolutely,
obviously with no funds, no means to do anything.
That's right. But yeah, we were reasonably, mature. We were good consultants, and we knew strategic sourcing and procurement.
Well, yes.
But none of us had any idea how to sell a project to a client, or how to build a client relationship. We'd not been
on the sales side, really.
We'd not been on that side because we were too junior. So then, there we were. We scrambled around, and because there was 6 of us, I think if it'd been 1 or 2 of us, it would have been easy to throw in the towel. But because there was a few of us, it made more sense to stick together.
Strength in numbers.
And we had strength in numbers, and we had a bit more horsepower than you might otherwise have. And so we set out to find an alternate source of funds. We ended up getting about $1 million worth of funding from some angel investors. But the angel investment was contingent on us having at least one decently sized client.
There's a contingency clause there, yes.
Pretty much. And essentially the angel investor said, look, we'll do this, but go away and find a client. And full disclosure, my father was the CFO of Ford of Europe at the time. And he didn't get us a project, but he got us an introduction to Ford of Europe's head of procurement. This was a $25 billion company at the time.
Of course.
So this guy was a big executive with a massive external spend, probably close to $20 billion of procurement spend.
Yeah. So let's break down a little bit more, because this is really key moments in it.
Yeah.
Great. Introduction, fine. Lots of people provide introductions, especially if you know each other. And you would have seen the fact, your dad as well, that you're coming into a group and all, experienced people. Describe that moment, because I like to unpack some of these situations, right, where you now know that you're about to go and position yourself. You prepared yourself probably quite a lot. How was that first? We've never done sales. We're about to go in and do that. Explain how that day went. Quite interesting to find out.
No, it was a seminal moment, and we didn't have huge expectations. We thought the guy would have a nice chat with us and give us some feedback. And we thought maybe if we're really lucky, he'll throw us a little bone and say, here's a £20,000 little project you guys can do. Because that would be nothing to a guy like that. But still, we were very nervous. This was the biggest executive we'd ever met. And it was Jens and myself. And I remember we went to the Ford headquarters in Cologne. We took a Ryanair flight and rented the cheapest, smallest car you can imagine. And so we went up to the executive floor of the Ford offices. And I remember we went to the executive bathroom, and it was all very quiet. There was nobody in there. And we were washing our hands, and we just gave each other that look of, okay, this is it.
Make it or break it.
It's make or break. And in we went, and we gave the guy our little pitch. We went through our little pitch deck. And halfway through, you could see the cogs started turning in his head. And after a while, he interrupted us, and he said, look, I'll cut to the chase. I've got A.T. Kearney in here sourcing direct materials and components. He said, and it's going very well. They're going to save me a lot of money. But I also have several $1 billion of non-production spend, indirect spend, that I'd like to go at, but I've got no more budget. He said, and you guys, from what I can see, are a relatively senior team of Kearney guys. And you've told me that you're willing to put your fee at risk. So how about this? He said, how about I carve out $500 million of non-production spend, let you have a go at it, and I pay you at the end and I'll pay you out of the savings. I'll give you a cut of the savings.
So 100% risk.
100% risk. And being young and naive and desperate, we jumped at this. And so, but in hindsight, that was our big break. And you need, if you're going to grow a company, you need some of these strokes of luck, and you need some of these breaks.
And you got to take the moment and grab it completely by the horns there and just went for it.
Absolutely. You got to recognize it, and you've got to grab it, and you've got to bend over backwards to make it happen. So that was it. So then the entire founding team, really the next 15 to 18 months, were on the ground at Ford, doing strategic sourcing, doing the heavy lifting. The team was not that keen. This was not our model. We didn't want to do big company consulting. We wanted to be a .com. Everybody wanted to be back at the office, strategizing how we're going to win the next 100 clients. And instead, there we were at another big company,
doing what you had done for years before.
Doing what we'd done for years.
But different. It's for yourselves, and it was your own sort of ambition and your own dream, really.
It was, and it's not what we set out to do. But after several months, we did start to realize, we saw all around us these .com e-procurement players falling over. And we started to realize that maybe the original business model of being a .com with hundreds of small clients attached to our central deals and our technology, maybe that wasn't realistic. And actually, we were pretty good at the consulting piece, and it was working at Ford, and now we had a very good credential. So we changed our mindset halfway through and said, well, actually, this is the way to go. Let's build on this, and let's create a specialist, procurement and sourcing consultancy out of this.
Wow. And it must have been quite, worrying, stressful at the same time, and getting into this, but also quite fulfilling in a way to see that, maybe not on purpose, but what kind of turned out to be, started actually going towards the positive end of what you needed to do.
Yeah.
And did the name of the company already exist at that point? Did Efficio was already formalized?
Yeah, that name existed. We had a very ugly homemade PowerPoint logo, but the name was there.
No AI back then to go and ask it to improve it. You just had to
it was all homemade. And then really we were all delivering one big program for 15 months, 18 months. Towards the end of that, we then started to negotiate about our fee. And we'd done a 100% risk-reward deal, and our contract was very clear, but the sponsor within the client had not really internalized what that contract was, and was kind of in his head thinking, well, we'll pay these guys a little bit of money at the end.
Classic situation which happens also to us, which again, a lot of times, most consultancy, you do advise on not going 100% risk because of that. Because, once you see the actual figure, you kind of go, whoa, wait a second. that's a significant
And that's
outlay.
Exactly what happened. It was because we saved them a lot of money, and in the end, they paid us $4 million. But they were very surprised at that. That was not the idea what they had in their heads, but that's what was in the contract.
And what's really interesting out of the whole thing here is, you started with the idea of that .com. They potentially positioned 4 million, and you somehow, in your own merit, built up the whole thing and came back to that exact same figure that you had originally planned to do through the delivery, really. And the thing that we've experienced over a time, and you are probably having to learn yourself, you're very focused. You were there delivering. Then you had that situation where you had to, finalize the commercials, and you got where you needed to. But then you were starting again from scratch, right? You went, okay, here we are. We finished we've got a great brand now that we can use.
We had a great brand, and we had $4 million. So that was really our, if you like, our second round of funding. But we were back at zero because we'd all been delivering. We had zero pipeline and no idea how to build one.
Yeah.
And so, it was sink or swim. We had to simply get out there, hit the streets, knock on doors, and build on the one credential that we had.
Yeah, and for our younger audience, this wasn't LinkedIn or sending a message
No.
on that. You really had
it
to
was,
pick up the phone.
and it was snail mail back then.
Snail
so it
mail
was
as well.
going to the post office and mailing, 150 letters, that kind of thing.
I mean, with the funding, you were good at that point, but it still needed a lot of effort.
Yeah. And we were completely unknown, and we had very little credential. We had one client logo essentially.
You know what's interesting of that, Alex, as well is you had to give some of that funds back to whoever invested in that initial period, the £1 million
Yeah.
something. But it could have been quite tempting to just go, hey, the 6 of us, split it this way. Off we go. We stop this journey, which was quite complicated. Actually, we've done pretty well out of it. Each one buys yourself a house, and then you can kind of carry on with your life.
Yeah.
Did that ever cross your mind at that point?
No. Funnily enough, that was never discussed. Yeah. I mean, we all knew it was.
You're already now saying we've been successful once.
Yeah, and we'd gone through so much pain by this point, and we'd survived, and so that emboldened us. But yeah, we then went through a period of slowly building our credential. What we did have from day one is that we were good consultants. We were schooled in the Carney way. We had a very good proposition that can save you a lot of money. And as individuals, I think we were credible. And we always did good work. We always had good word of mouth. People always said to us, we heard you guys are good. We hear you guys know what you're doing. But then it was a case of one by one, really obtaining more logos.
Yeah. So to tell us that first. First of all, I suppose you split amongst yourself. Who's going to do the what role within this firm? And
yeah.
I obviously it seems very evident that given that you brought in the first big one, it made sense with the experience that you and Jens had at that point that you guys go off and do something like that, right? So how did you go about splitting that? Again, we are very much at the beginning. You hadn't run a business.
No.
How did you go around through this?
Yeah, I mean the roles really, I guess, evolved organically. So Jens was the CEO, that was, and it was his idea originally, so that was natural. And he actually didn't get involved in the project. He stayed at the base and he did the administration and managed the company. I naturally drifted into the sales role. One of the other guys became the people/HR person.
Okay.
And one of them became the intellectual capital guru, harvesting all the intellectual capital out of projects and making that available to the rest of the team. And
wow.
Yeah, and we decided early on that I should focus on sales and I should not be encumbered by too much delivery.
Whereas these other guys, they did that as an extra role, but they had to do the delivery as well.
Yeah. But we decided to free up my time for the selling. So I would sell, hand over to a team, and then go on to the next sale, which is rare in consulting. But it was a very good thing to do because one of the problems consultancies have is their senior team has no capacity for selling because they're deep in the client work. And by freeing me up, enabled me to become essentially a bit of a traveling salesman. So we then built the company logo by logo. Again, we got a little bit lucky with the logos. We won the early projects were companies like O2,
wow,
Marsh McLennan, BP. I can name all these names. This is 25 years ago now.
25 years later. And would you say that a lot of these did you have to use the strength of the first gig you did, or was a combination of things that brought you that those
Yeah,
logos?
it was partly the strength of the first gig, but we needed people to take a leap of faith.
Mm-hmm.
You know, no chief procurement officer in their right mind would really choose a non-branded, very unproven firm like Efficio at the time. But again, one of the very early clients was O2, and the CPO there was a very ambitious guy who wanted to make a big splash, and he talked to all the big firms, and he decided on us because he could see that we'd be very dedicated. And he told us, he said, if I'd hired McKinsey or Carney, he said, they would have used me to get to my boss and sell him other things, whereas you guys would be loyal to me and would be focused 100% on delivering what I need. And that's why he went with us.
And it's fair to say that, you had a very, very clear specialist, specific set of skills and role that you were planning to do. And maybe this was quite at the beginning. You probably were the first consultancy which did procurement and supply chain in that specificity. So that must have been also an advantageous position, because the AT Carneys and others, great brands, super capable, but it's one of the subsections, and you could have used that into the
absolutely depth. We were really it was a case of being in the right place at the right time. The market there was no large credible specialist firm. There was a few very small firms that were of variable quality, let's say, or not the level of quality of the big firms. But clients were getting dissatisfied with the big firms, saying, well, we love the professionalism of a McKinsey and an AT Carney, and we love the comfort of the brand, but they're very generalist, and frankly, they're very expensive. And the market was crying out for a credible specialist that was much more focused. And we stepped into that place. And I remember our tagline for the first few years was a bit of a mouthful, but it was we combined the professionalism of a top-end firm with the focus and execution of a niche firm.
Yeah.
And that was really appealing to clients because they wanted that combination.
Yeah.
And none of the other niche firms had that level of professionalism whereby they'd come from an AT Carney.
Yeah, because I did be someone who's maybe a couple of really experienced people going out and selling themselves, or there's the other end of the spectrum as such, maybe have a specific piece of software or something that they want to build on. So I imagine
and
having those 7, 8, 9 years with a good, first set of clients must have been quite a strong.
It was, and it showed through in simple things like our slideware when we would pitch. People laugh at that, but that stuff is important when you're pitching against McKinsey and Deloitte.
Yeah.
And then you go in the room and you put up your slides and it looks homemade.
Yeah.
You immediately lose credibility.
Yeah. It's so much about perception with these things, right?
Exactly.
Apart from the fact that you had the group of you were all mid-level consultants, but then it's like if you turn up to a place dressed in a certain way and dressed in another, you want an impact and you need to prove this. And we get this conversation often now. It's all about slides. It's true, but also don't make it about slides by having the best quality that you can, so that you don't even notice it and you just align yourself.
Exactly.
And so that's really interesting. So your personal journey of doing all of this, of course, must have been quite uphill. Again, you hadn't actually been on the consulting selling side. You had been just selling yourself and learning as you go. So there must have been some interesting stories of what in hindsight, looking at it going, oh, I remember going and doing these pitches in this way. Tell us some examples, maybe.
Yeah.
Again, without giving away names. So
Sure. No, there was some cringe-worthy meetings there in the mix.
Yeah.
And the problem was, when you're within a big firm, then someone will slowly mentor you and teach you the ropes, and they'll bring you slowly into the selling process.
Yeah.
With us, we had no mentors. We had no one to tell us what to do, and it was sink or swim. So I remember the early pitches would be us, arriving at the meeting, immediately opening our big fat pitch deck and forcing the client to listen to every word of a 20-page presentation. So that was
Straight down the facts. This is what we do.
That's
This
it.
is how you
That's
get it.
it.
This is like
Never
reading
mind
a
what-
manual.
Never mind what the client wants. This is what we do. And plus, we just had no credential. We had very few logos. And I remember we stretched those logos as far as we could.
Of course.
So Ford back in those days owned Jaguar, Land Rover, Volvo, and Aston Martin.
So all of them came out.
So suddenly we had 5 very impressive automotive logos, and I'm sure everybody realized, hold on, that's just one. That's just one client.
But they didn't have a chance to hear because you were busy going through the whole
exactly
presentation.
And in hindsight, I'm sure there was quite a few clients who, once we left and closed the door, had a bit of a giggle about us. Somehow, against all odds, I think, just because we were very committed, we had grit, and we were good people. We were professionals. We pushed through.
So it was learning by doing.
Learning by doing.
Let's give some value to those watching. So in hindsight, you know that's not the way to do it. How would you go about these days positioning yourself when you are meeting a client?
Well, it's so much easier once you have a brand and once you have 50 logos on your logo page. It's night and day. So in the later years, we would go in the early years, we'd go into a meeting and our credentials were not apparent, and we'd get a lot of pushback and a lot of questioning and grilling, and that questioning and grilling, decreased over time
simply by just having more logos.
Simply by just being a lot more credible. And it got to the point towards the end in
of course.
2021, 2022, when you'd go in the room and your reputation already preceded you. Okay, these are the top niche firms. They're showing me 100 logos, and the questioning stopped because they just accepted that we were very good and our reputation preceded us.
But in terms of approach, for those maybe who are not in that stage and who are still, building their logo, I imagine, the listening part rather than the selling part would have been
the listening part is important, but you do also need to lay out your stall and say, this is what we do. And I think probably what we did well is we were quite honest, and it goes back to that authenticity. We didn't try to BS and lie and big ourselves up. We were very honest and said, look, we're just getting going. We don't have much credential, but we really know this stuff. We did it for X years at our old firm, and we're willing to put our fee at risk. And I think that sort of authenticity was a big factor in the success.
Yeah. And would you say that, at those kind of early few logos that you were starting to build, that they saw the hunger, so therefore you leveraged a bit around that, and you actually pushed the client to actually accept the fact that there'll be some risk of it, but you know what? The risk that you're getting is compensated by the fact that first, we're probably not going to be as expensive as some of the other guys.
No.
B, we're putting half of the expense at risk here. And C, really, we are specialists in what we do. So, you can sort of pull us apart if you need to, because you know what you're doing as well.
Exactly. So. I think you've nailed it. A big part of it is the hunger.
Yeah.
Because and they knew, O2 was an example. He knew that we had to make his project a success or we'd be finished.
Yeah.
Whereas if he'd hired McKinsey and they'd messed up the project, they'd still get paid and it wouldn't really matter. It wouldn't dent their reputation.
Yeah, so there's a good sign of a good CPO. He knew how to leverage that position with you guys at that time.
Absolutely. He knew we'd be loyal to him. We knew we would bend over backwards and make it happen. And indeed we did. Yeah. And then, as you said, we put our fees at risk, which was a big part of what made us attractive. Because back then, the large firms were very reluctant to do that. And we said, we came in the door saying we can do a low fixed fee, or we can put significant skin in the game.
Yeah.
And that's always attractive to people.
And so this is the evolution of a business, right? At that point, when you started having those 2, 3, 4, apart from the ones which are all parts of Ford logos, did you did you actually start saying, now it's time for us to bring in new people? So this is the next step in our growth of the business. How
Yeah.
did you go about that part again, in terms of deciding, okay, it's no longer about us now. We need to bring in more people.
We got to that point actually fairly early. So we started with the 6 founders.
Yeah.
Within a year, we'd probably hired 3, 4, 5 new people. I think the way we recruited those people was a big part of the success. So we, in the early years, we recruited exclusively seasoned sourcing consultants from the big firms, to continue that positioning of, look, we have that background and we have that caliber of person. And those people were hard to attract, because they were sitting pretty in
Already
the big firms.
Yeah. Why would they join another firm which is similar unless there was some value there?
But again, it was a little bit right place, right time, because that was the time when, let's say, people with MBAs working for the big firms started to say, actually, maybe I want something a bit more entrepreneurial. And so we tapped into that. And we learned very quickly, you, as a consultancy, you need to have 2 value propositions, one towards the clients and one towards recruits. Because when they come to you, they'll probably take a drop in salary, they'll take a drop in prestige, and what are you offering them, instead of that?
Yeah. So that must have been a cane, like every single turn has a new learning to do. Like one thing was learning how to do sales. Then I'm assuming your colleagues had to then learn how to structure something which entices people to A, join, B, once they join, they feel like there is some sort of level of structure, and then go. And also you at the same time presenting more opportunities for them to work on. So that must have been quite an experience which may have had some interesting stories come out.
Interesting stories? I'm not so sure, but I mean,
you were positioned probably in a way to already having had experience what good looks like in a good consultancy, right?
Yes, we knew all of that, which was a huge advantage.
But you had to create some things yourself, right? So how that, creating a culture in a business is quite an important thing. How did you go about that part?
I mean, you're absolutely right. Creating a culture is key. And what we did in the case of Efficio is we managed that culture very, very closely and tried to define it very clearly. I mean, part of it was that we were more entrepreneurial, but again, it was that mix of, we're very entrepreneurial, but we're extremely high quality. We're like the big firms, but in a small family setting, if you like. And again, that was attractive to the recruits in the same way that message was attractive to the clients.
There's probably both the personal aspect of it and then maybe creating a bit of a structure which allows the culture to feel supported, I suppose. There's going to be managers and people who drive knowledge, and then you bring in those people who are super junior, I suppose, who may not have that experience, and you need to feed all of that in. So culture is also created by some of that structure, I imagine.
It is, and consultants are very ambitious people, so you need to give them a path, a very clearly defined career ladder, and very clearly defined objectives that they have to hit in order to progress up that ladder. And we did that very well.
Again, in part in some of these conversations I've had with CPOs, is always about building the right team, building the right structure, and there's probably a certain type of person who's a good consultant and a certain type of person that you wanted to attract. But also there's an evolution, right? Some people are good at one point of the company's growth. Some other people are good at that. And did you notice that quite a bit, where you'd have a certain type of person coming in, and then over the years as the company grew, you started having different types of consultants join?
We got it right in terms of the culture. I think we got it right quite early on. And it was really that amongst the founding team, we had a certain profile and a certain culture, which was that, if I can say that, we were all bright, capable people, but without the arrogance.
Okay.
And with a willingness to really get our hands dirty and do the work. And of course, in consulting, as you know, there's plenty of arrogant people. So we filtered those guys out very early on and built a team that was not arrogant, that was very real, that was very collegiate, and that was very capable and very hardworking. And that really became the culture. And people grew up in that culture, and it sort of snowballed. What's interesting is that at a certain point, we needed to grow the top team. We needed to grow the partners so that we'd have more selling capability. And we tried on a few occasions to hire those people in from the outside, from the big firms. And we learned a big lesson there that's very difficult to do. And in fact, it failed in almost every case.
Instance, yeah.
Reason being that, a partner at McKinsey might be able to sell multi-million-dollar projects with that brand behind them, but very often in a setting of being in an entrepreneurial firm with no brand, they simply can't operate in the same way.
There must have been a who moment when people come in, which is hard to align with McKinsey or anybody, PwC or Deloitte or even any of those brands.
No, there's that, and then there's the fact that when a senior person from a prestigious firm comes to you, they make a trade-off. They're going to get less salary. They're going to get much less prestige. And so in their minds, they say, but I'll be compensated for that by being a really big fish in a small pond. And so
high expectations on equity and other things, I imagine.
That and a very big ego.
I'm
going to come in here and I'm going to be a big force. And of course, that would immediately get the backs up of the existing team.
Yeah.
And so in a few cases, the culture would just reject those people very quickly.
Yeah.
So that was a big lesson learned. And then we moved to exclusively promoting people to that level from within.
Yeah.
People that knew the culture, people that we trusted, people that wouldn't have that big ego expectation.
And it doesn't have to be necessarily people from the most junior level all the way up, but I imagine there would have been people who maybe have a few years of experience and you built them into that culture.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think one of the things that a lot of people say, often with consultancies, is great, you got this senior guy and then it's all these juniors who come in and do the delivery, right? And getting that balance right must have been quite important.
Yeah, and it helps when you're a specialist firm, because you're good at one thing. You've hopefully boiled that thing down into some intellectual capital that you can use to train people up, and you build the whole culture around a level of competence in that area.
Yeah, and that's quite a good point, because there's probably the temptation in my experience for a lot of consultancies where you've done a good piece of work and someone goes, these guys are smart people, let's get them to do this something else, which is completely unrelated, irrelevant to what you've set out to do. Did you have those situations, and how it must have been tempting, because it's obviously revenue and it's obviously a continued growth? How did you stick to those? Or what was your approach there?
We actually were not that tempted. We recognized from day one that we'd be best off staying in our swim lane, because we were very good at one thing, and we knew that if we branched away from that thing and then delivered suboptimal quality, then the reputation would suffer. And as a new specialist firm, you can't afford to drop the ball on any project, because your reputation is very quickly destroyed. You're only as good as your last gig.
So you didn't really.
we didn't really. But one thing I've seen since I started advising other firms is that it is an issue for a lot of firms. We were fortunate in that we started out with a strong value proposition. Most firms don't start out with that. They start out with being specialists in a certain industry. They have a certain amount of contacts in that industry, and they'll pick up whatever pieces of work people will give them. And really, I mean, the research is very clear on this. The highest chance of success is if you have a focused area where you play and where you're very strong. When I try to hone a firm's value proposition down into an area of focus, there's a lot of resistance because there's a perceived risk that, well, hold on, but then we're closing the door to this type of work and that type of work. And, in consulting, one of the problems is you've got bright people and in theory they can turn their hand to anything. So we'll give anything a go.
It's an interesting point there, because what you're effectively saying is, this happens probably a lot where you don't want to be pigeonholed into one thing because you're actually quite capable, smart, there's cross capabilities that one has. But what you're saying here is actually there is a lot of strength in being very clear about your messaging and be pigeonholed in a way, going against the common grain of thinking, because then you can always be certain about what it is that you're delivering. You can give the best quality. You are the best at that. And there's nothing else.
And ultimately, that's why people choose you.
Yeah.
If they wanted a McKinsey that can do anything, they'd go to McKinsey.
So the quality is important. It's driven by that, really, by just identifying what you're good at and sticking to it and improving it incrementally over a period of time. So we are probably at the mid-level of that point of how the company was growing and how your experience was in. When did you realize that you guys had made it, or you had actually got to a position? You've shared with me prior stories. Maybe it's quite interesting to hear.
Yeah, no, it creeps up on you.
Yeah,
and it just snowballed, and really we grew to a place beyond our wildest dreams. We became several magnitudes bigger than we'd ever anticipated. But I remember, once a year, obviously we'd have a big Christmas party, and we'd rent out, a ballroom in a big hotel, and we, suddenly there'd be several hundred people there, and the founders would always be standing on the balcony looking down in utter disbelief that all these people worked for us.
It must have been quite a thing. And I remember the story you're telling about just sitting there doing this presentation and then just looking at, we had this 6-7 logos that were the same one and a few others, and then a few years later you're opening the pages and going, wow, these are all the things.
Yeah,
these are all the projects that we've been working on. These are all the logos. So that must have been quite a remarkable achievement as well.
It was very satisfying, and yeah, through that logo page, all consultancies are keen to get new logos and are very proud of their logos and the number and the quality of the logos. And you can trace the history of Efficio through the logos page that was used in the pitch through the years. And it grew literally from, I remember the first one, half the page was logos of companies we'd worked at as individuals prior to founding Efficio's. The other half of the page was, the 5 or 6 Ford logos.
Yeah.
And then it grew to where there was 3 pages with tiny logos and 10, 15 logos per industry.
Yeah.
So it very, very nicely reflects the journey that we went on.
Yeah, that must have been quite an incredible feat. So, being an entrepreneur is what all 6 of you were doing. All this will have brought its own challenges, even at a personal level. So,
yeah,
we all know the stories of entrepreneurs. You all in or not, you have to be in to make it successful. That must have been also quite an interesting journey for yourself. Are there anecdotes or stories in hindsight that you'd say, we
Definitely.
may have done it slightly different, or actually, you know what, I probably ignored some other aspects of my life, but it brought us benefits?
Yeah, well, there's certainly stories of personal hardship, if you like. So we we ran out of money several times
Wow.
in the first few years.
Yeah.
And like I said, we quickly had a few employees. So we'd have 6 founders and then 6 or 7 employees. And the policy was always the employees would continue to be paid if there wasn't enough money, but the founders would take the hit because we had the equity.
That's an incredible actually mentality. I didn't know of this, and it's actually quite an interesting one because tendentially most people go the other way.
Yes. I guess they would. But we said from day one, the employees they don't own the thing. They have a job. They need a salary. We can do without. So 3 or 4 times we, based on the cash flow situation, we just cut our salaries in half or reduced the salary to zero for several months. And I remember I lived in Richmond, Surrey at the time, and I had a little shelf by the front door, and there was a stack this high of bills on that shelf because the bills would come through the letterbox. I knew I couldn't pay them, and I'd just park them on that shelf.
Wow.
And every morning I could see this stack of
bills growing.
Stack of unpaid bills. I got to a point where my net worth was minus 100,000.
Wow.
No house, no car, no savings, 100,000 in debt. And that's very scary. Remember, I had a baby at this time. I had the second child, I think 3 years into Efficio. So quite early on, I had 2 tiny children. And in consulting, when you're small, you're never stable. You look 6 months out, and there's no revenue unless you generate it from scratch.
Yeah, which is an interesting point to make, right? And whoever takes up the mantle of wanting to go into consulting, you're starting from scratch every few months.
And that drives a level of what I call, existential stress.
Yeah.
You don't know in a year, are we going to make it, or are we going to be dead in the water? And most founders of small firms who go to a Deloitte and say, "Take the keys, give me a bit of money, I'm done." It's because they just can't take the stress anymore.
Yeah,
because you never get to a place of comfort.
Yeah,
because
give hope to some of those who are maybe running through this. Is there a point in time where you suddenly felt, actually, that changes?
It does, and it changes with scale. They say that once you're at 125 consultants, you're stable. I don't know where that number comes from, but it feels about right. Just because you've got it's statistics, right? You've got so many projects, you've got so many prospects that you're going to win a certain percentage, and you're probably going to be okay. When you're tiny, you have 3 big prospects in the year. If you lose all 3 of them, you're finished.
Yeah.
When you're big, you have 50. If you win 20, you're going to be okay. Yeah. But it takes a long time to get to that point.
Yeah. What I take away from that piece of conversation is actually kudos to you and your business partners back then as well, because it takes a lot of effort, but also deciding, instead of just protecting yourselves, to protecting your teams and staff, and you taking the hit. It's like the stories you hear about those Japanese CEOs who decide, I cut down my thing. So that must have been, to do that in a group as well. It's again a strength of showing, again, going back to the point of culture, building the right culture. That you've got your back covered as such. So that must have been quite an interesting period of time, having gone to the heights of, I got 4 million, then we spent it all on doing all these projects and all that, and then going back down and then going back up.
Yeah, no, it was the right thing to do, but it was tough on the founders. I remember my wife calling me in the middle of the day, very excited because she'd found a £5 note behind the sofa.
Oh, wow.
And now she could go to the local shop and buy orange juice for the kids. That's a true story. That's how tough it was. I remember getting a flat tire in the car and thinking, I have no idea how I'm going to pay for this damn tire.
Oh my God. Yeah. And it must have been, but I suppose you knew that the only way to get out of this was to sort of keep working, keep pushing really hard, right? So
Yeah.
how did you go about that part of the sort of keeping yourself grounded to go, I'm going to continue doing this, I'm going to go pushing hard? Because it could have been easy, as you say, right? Okay, let's just give up and let's go get I've got a good experience here. I'm going to go and get a new role somewhere.
And you didn't know that if you just kept going, it would work out. That at least the first, let's say, 7 years, there was always a thought in the back of your head, it might well fold in the next 12 months, and then I'm going to have to go, I don't know, back to A.T. Kearney with my tail between my legs and beg for my old job back.
Yeah.
But I think that's where the strength in numbers comes in.
Yes.
I think, and most specialist firms are founded by one or two people, as is the case with yourselves. And then it's much easier to look at each other and say, shall we just throw in the towel?
Yeah.
When it's a big group and they're all committed, it just keeps you going forward.
Give us a sense of the experience of working cross countries and cross nations, because at that point, yes, you worked with some big brands, so naturally they would have had locations around the world.
Yeah.
What was the experience like going, right, I've set up a business which is now starting to be successful here. How did it come about to go, right, it's now time to expand further outwards?
Well, we started working internationally very early on, simply because the founder team was very international. I'm trying to remember, we had myself, a German, we had a Dane, we had a Czech person, we had a Swiss Ethiopian. So we were very international. We had quite a few languages between us.
Amazing.
And we were used to working internationally. And of course, in procurement, a lot of the work requires you to work internationally because you're trying to pool volumes across geographies. So we started early on doing non-UK projects, but with the entire team based out of the UK, and that came quite quickly. It started with Ford. It then carried on with O2, and so really it was an international firm from day one. We kept the team centralized in London for as long as we could, because you don't want to start fragmenting yourselves across different countries, and then you have a team in Chicago that has no work and they're all sitting on the bench.
Right.
So we had the team centralized so we could be as flexible with them as possible, and that worked very well. Yeah. And it works up to a point, and then you have to go local.
Then you have to start opening up local locations and doing that. So that must be an experience as well, like having to manage people across countries, and not just manage them as in there might be a head office somewhere. It's actually your office that you are setting up, right?
Yeah, and in consulting anyway, you have the problem that people are based at the client, so people are never in one place. So we worked very hard to bring people together once a month. We'd have everybody come back to the office, we'd share experiences, we'd update them on the business to try to foster that culture, despite the fact that they were always off in different countries doing disparate projects.
Right.
And that's very important in a consulting firm. You have to work very hard to build the culture, because the default is that there is no culture. You're just a bunch of fragmented people who
are sitting in other companies.
Exactly.
With their own culture. And then after a few months, you might be going to another one, and then you're having to absorb. So what are some of the tips, apart from, once a month, maybe bringing people together was probably one thing. Did you try and keep maybe a similarity in all the structures and all the things that you did across
the countries? Structure, the career path was the same. The salaries, that was quite a challenge, because different countries have different salary expectations. So Germans are paid more than Brits, let's say, in the industry. But then how do you justify that to your team? So getting all of that straight was quite complicated. And I think it was definitely the right move to keep everyone in the same place initially for as long as possible, in order to really kind of grow and bake that culture before you then set them free
Yeah.
and start offices in different locations.
For those who are keen and interested in doing a career in consulting,
Yeah.
in your experience now of, especially within procurement and supply chain, I would say, in your experience now, what are the key indicators of markers for someone who is actually a pretty strong consultant? And this, we talked about this, there's different levels. There's people who are very good at potentially selling, and actually they might be quite rare, so you need to like foster them.
Yeah.
There are those who are very good at the delivery side. What has been your experience for those founders who might be like thinking about, employing those first few people?
Yeah, I mean, what makes a good consultant, it depends on the type of consulting you do. If you do pure strategy and pure advisory, that's one thing. But in our case, and in all procurement consulting firms, you actually have to deliver. So it's a mix of, I guess, raw intellect and analytical capability, but also the people skills to work with client people and actually get things done. And that's a rare combination, that someone has the brains and the analytical piece and the softer people skills. I think the other thing is if you're going to build a firm, is that you have a cohesive culture. Like I said, that you don't, whatever the culture that is that you're looking for. But if you're, in our case, we didn't want those arrogant people. We didn't want very theoretical people. We wanted very grounded, authentic people that could work hand in hand with the client. So you're looking for really the magic mix of skills across people.
Yeah, no, that's I probably relate to that in terms of getting that. Intelligence is an important thing, but then also being able to relate to people and communicate that message is quite a strong
and
trait.
Being able to execute. I think that's a whole area by itself. You can be very intelligent and be a people person, but you can't execute. And make something happen.
Yeah.
So it's really those three things in combination.
Yeah, I get that. And, in your then career at that point, going back to the story of growing, the company's growing, it's got international offices and all of that.
Yeah.
Let's speak to sort of get closer to where you are now.
Yeah.
What kind of makes you think, right, I've done a good job here now.
Yeah.
It's time now I do something different. What are the markers for those people who are maybe in similar positions?
Good question. Well, a number of, I guess the question really is what made me leave in the
essence.
End. And there's a number of reasons. One of them is one of the downsides of building something very specialist is that essentially you're doing one thing. And personally, I got to the point, it's the 10,000 hour rule. I had so much experience in basically selling procurement transformation programs that I did become extremely good at it. And I'd go into a meeting, I'd be pitching against the big firms, and I knew how to pitch it. I knew what objections would come. I knew how the whole meeting would go, and it became incredibly easy for me to defend ourselves and win the job. To the point where that became frankly boring. I wasn't growing anymore because you just focused for 22 years on one thing.
You had mastered it completely, basically.
Mastered it completely, and then what do you do from there? And that's a general problem for specialist firms, in that people along the journey will leave because they're becoming bored and they want to broaden out, and your firm doesn't allow them to broaden out. And I guess I had that at a senior level. The other more fundamental reason was that I had the opportunity to take my chips off the table.
Yeah,
and actually, as we were growing it, I always had a number in my head, and it was at 3 times that number. And it's a little bit like I spent 22 years sitting at a roulette table, and I'd win and I'd lose, and I'd win and I'd lose, but I'd built up quite a little pile of chips. And then someone tapped me on the shoulder and said, would you like to cash those in now, sir? And that's a hard thing to do.
Of course.
And what you see in the world is, plenty of entrepreneurs who carry on endlessly, and you get greedy. I want more, and I want more, and I want more. Right? You can get to the point where you spend your entire life doing this thing, and the classic saying is, no one on their deathbed says, "I wish I'd spent more time at the office." So for me, it was a case of, this is enough. This will do. We've been very successful. I can be financially secure, and I'm going to step off the hamster wheel, which takes a lot of courage.
Because 22 years of doing the same thing is a lot of who you are was built on that as well, right? So then suddenly giving those keys back and going, okay, I'm going to go off now.
Yep. You're letting go of a lot. And also, certainly in my case, you are leaving money on the table.
Yeah,
if I'd carried on another 10 years, I would have made a lot more money. But life is not just about money. Life is not just about success. And I consciously decided I want to wind down a little bit, and I want to spend more time with the kids and the family. I also didn't particularly like what I was becoming, because I was so focused on the success and the money. Really, for many years, I was the archetypal sort of cocky, arrogant consultant.
Yeah.
And I wanted to unwind some of that and become really a more human person and focus more on relationships, etc.
So in hindsight, looking at that, and if there were any tips to someone, what can you do even whilst you're still focused in there to just sort of take some time off, take some steps away? What would you suggest to people?
Yeah, I would say, the cliche. It's about the journey, not the destination.
Yeah.
For me, my problem was it was all about the destination, and I kind of plowed through the journey and didn't enjoy the journey, didn't care about the people along the journey, and I got to the destination. But it's a trade-off, right? If you are going to create a business and really make it happen, you do have to be very focused on the end point, if you like. But my advice would be, try to enjoy the journey along the way.
Yeah. And I must say that also, there is that element of it, but there's something strong came out for me from my assessment outside, which was the need to evolve. And it seems like after 20 odd years, you felt that need to evolve stronger in there, which I think has a very strong connection with a lot of the CPOs that I've also interviewed. Is there that need to constantly evolve and do something different? So it seems like that, powered through in the end and came out again.
No, absolutely. And, a couple of founders left along the way. A couple of founders are still there. But overall, it was a fantastic journey. My advice to people would be, it's not easy. No. Think about it. You do make sacrifices along the way. I had 22 incredibly stressful years. I had a heart attack at the age of 46.
Wow.
All stress induced. And it was very satisfying, and I got a good payoff at the end. But nothing in life comes for free. You pay a price for everything you do.
Yeah, so you have to take that balance as well. Yes, as you say, there's the end game there, but at the same time, it comes with its own cost, which you have to be conscious about getting into this as well. So definitely a very, very interesting journey. Thank you so much, Alex, for sharing all of this journey that you've been through. So if there was some sort of parting advice that you'd leave us with in terms of generally procurement, and maybe just generally, for someone who's ambitious and wants to achieve a lot, irrespective of whether you become an entrepreneur or someone, is there anything which comes to mind that you'd share?
I think I would say, to do something very successful, to do something ambitious and successful, a lot of things have to come together. You do have to work very hard. hard work is probably the main driver of success. Sure, you have to have talent and ability, but don't underestimate the need for very hard work. Patience, it's going to take, to build a consultancy, certainly it's going to take 10, 20 years until you're in a good place. You have to have some luck along the way. But as you said, luck is a funny thing, right? It falls from the sky, but you have to put yourself in its path. You have to recognize it. You have to grab it
by the horns, yeah.
But I do think fundamentally, what I do see, and what I would say was my experience, that if you take a big risk and you put yourself out there and you commit and you suffer in life, then you will be rewarded.
Yeah.
And I think that, to me, is the bottom line.
Great. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you.
Great conversation.
Yep. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
In this series, we have been very fortunate to bring to the fore the stories of some of the great procurement and supply chain leaders. If you feel like you have a great story to share with us, do reach out, as we'd love to share your story with everyone in the community.